Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my beautiful hot messes. My name is Mistress Lavender, and today I'm continuing on reading chapter 4 into 5 of The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson. I'm starting on page 86, Defining Good and Bad Values. Are you ready? And we have our pen in case I don't know some words. We're going to underline them. Yay! Good values are 1. Reality based, 2. Socially constructive, 3. Immediate and controllable. Bad values are superstitious, socially destructive, and 3. Not immediate or controllable. Honesty is a good value because it's something you have complete control over. It reflects reality and it benefits others, even if it's sometimes unpleasant. Popularity, on the other hand, is a bad value. If that's your value, and if your metric is being the most popular guy or girl at the dance party, much of what happens will be out of your control. You don't know who else will be at the event, and you probably won't know half the people there. Second, the value and metric isn't based on reality. You may feel popular or unpopular, when in fact you have no effing clue what anybody else thinks of you. Side note, as a rule, people who are terrified of what others think about them are actually terrified of all the essy things they think about themselves being reflected back at them. Ooh. Some examples are good, healthy values: honesty, innovation, vulnerability, standing up for oneself, standing up for others, self respect, curiosity, charity, humility, creativity. Some examples of bad, unhealthy values: dominance through manipulation or violence, indiscriminate, indiscriminating indiscriminate effing. I don't understand that one. Feeling good all the time, always being the center of attention, not being alone, being liked by everybody, being rich for the sake of being rich, sacrificing small aliens or small animals to the pagan gods. You'll notice that good, healthy values are achieved internally. Something like creativity or humility can be experienced right now. You simply have to orient your mind in a certain way to experience it. These values are immediate and controllable and engage you with the world as it is, rather than what you wish it to be. Bad values are generally reliant on external events: flying in a private jet, being told you're right all the time, owning a house in the Bahamas, eating cannoli while getting blown by three strippers. Bad values, while sometimes fun and pleasurable, lie outside of your control and often require socially destructive or superstitious means to achieve. Values are about prioritization. Everybody would love a good cannoli or a house in the Bahamas. The question is your priorities. What are the values that you prioritize about above everything else, and that therefore influence your decision making more than anything else? Hiroru Unda's highest value was complete loyalty and service to the Japanese Empire. This value, in case this value, in case you couldn't tell from reading about him, stank worse than a rotten sushi roll. It created really essy problems for Hiroro. Namely, he got stuck on a remote island where he lived off bugs and worms for 30 years. Oh, and he felt compelled to murder innocent civilians too. So, despite the fact that Hiroro saw himself as a success, and despite the fact he lived up to his metrics, I think we can all agree that his life really sucked. None of us who would trade shoes with him given the opportunity, nor would we condemn his actions. Dave Mustaine achieved great fame and glory and felt like a failure anyway. This is because he adopted a crappy value based on the arbitrary comparison to the success of others. This value gave him awful problems, such as: I need to sell 150 million or more records, then everything will be great. And my next tour needs to be nothing but stadiums. Problems he thought he needed to solve in order to be happy. It's no surprise that he wasn't. On the contrary, Pete Best pulled a switcheroo. Despite being depressed and distraught and getting kicked out of the Beatles, as he grew older, he realized he learned to reprioritize what he cared about, and was able to measure his life in a new light. Because of this, Bess grew in a happy and healthy old man with an easy life and a great family. Things that, ironically, the four Beatles would spend decades struggling to achieve or maintain. When we have poor values, that is, poor standards, we set ourselves and others, we are essentially giving F's about things that don't matter. That, in fact, make our life worse. But when we choose better values, we are able to divert our F's to something better, towards things that matter, things that improve the state of our well being and generate happiness, pleasure, and success as side effects. This, in a nutshell, is what self improvement is really about: prioritizing better values, choosing better things to give an F about. Because when you give better F's, you get better problems. And when you get better problems, you get a better life. The rest of this book is dedicated to 5 counterintuitive values that I believe are the most beneficial values one can adapt or adopt. All follow the backward law we talked about earlier, in that they're negative. All require confronting deeper problems rather than avoiding them through highs. These 5 values are both unconventional and uncomfortable, but to me they are life-changing. The first will look the first will look at in the chapter is a radical form of responsibility. Taking responsibility for everything that occurs in your life, regardless of who's at fault. The second is uncertainty, the acknowledgement of your own ignorance and the cultivation of constant doubt in your own beliefs. The next is failure, the willingness to discover your own flaws and mistakes so that you may improve upon. The fourth is rejection, the ability to both say and hear no, thus clearly defining what you will and will not accept in your life. The final value is contem- the contemplation of one's mortality. This one is crucial because paying vigilant attention to one's own death is perhaps the one thing capable of helping us keep all of our values in proper perspective. Now, chapter 5. You are always choosing. Imagine that somebody puts a gun to your head and tells you that you have to run 26.2 miles in under 5 hours or he'll kill you and your entire family. That would suck. Now imagine that you bought two nice shoes. Now imagine that you bought two shoes. Now imagine that you bought nice shoes and running gear, trained religiously for months, and completed your first marathon with all of your closest friends and family cheering on at the finish line. That would that could potentially be one of your proudest moments of your life. Exact same 26.2 miles. Exact same person running them. Exact same pain coursing through your exact same legs. But when you choose it freely and prepared for it, it was a glorious and important milestone in your life. When it was forced upon you against your will, it was one of the most terrifying and painful experiences of your life. Often, the only difference between a problem being painful or being powerful is a sense of that we choose it and that we are responsible for it. If you're miserable in your current situation, chances are it's because you feel like some part of it is outside your control. That there's a problem with, oh my goodness, that there's a problem you have no ability to solve. A problem that was somehow thrust upon you without your control. I need to breathe. When we feel that we're choosing our problems, we feel empowered. When we feel that our problems are being forced upon us against our will, we feel victimized and miserable. The choice. William James had problems, really bad problems. Although born into a wealthy and prominent family, from birth, James suffered life-threatening health issues: an eye problem that left him temporarily blinded as a child, a terrible stomach condition that caused excessive vomiting and forced him to adopt an obscure and highly sensitive diet, trouble with his hearing, back spasms so bad that for days at a time he often couldn't sit or stand upright. Due to his health problems, James spent most of his time at home. He didn't have many friends and he wasn't particularly good at school. Instead, he passed the days painting. That was the only thing he liked and the only thing he was particularly good at. Unfortunately, no one else thought he was good at it. When he grew into adulthood, nobody bought his work. And as the years dragged on, his father, a wealthy businessman, began ridiculing him for his laziness and his lack of talent. Meanwhile, his younger brother, Henry James, went on to become a world renowned novelist. His sister, Alice James, made a good living as a writer as well. William was the family oddball, the black sheep. In a desperate attempt to salvage the young man's future, James' father used his business connections to get him admitted into Harvard Medical School. It was his last chance, his father told him. If he screwed this up, there was no hope for him. But James never felt at home or at peace at Harvard. Medicine never appealed to him. He spent the whole time feeling like a fake or a fraud. After all, he couldn't overcome his own problems. How could he ever hope to have the energy to help others with theirs? After touring a psychiatric facility one day, James mused in his diary that he felt he had more in common with the patients than the doctors. A few years went by, and again, to his father's disapproval, James dropped out of medical school. But rather than dealt with the burnout of his father's wrath, he decided to get away. He signed up for he signed up to join an anthropological, I think I'm saying that wrong, expedition in the Amazon rainforest. This was in the 1960s. So trans transcontinental travel was difficult and dangerous. If you ever played the computer game Oregon Trial when you were a kid, it was kind of like that. With the don't know this word, Dysentry, don't know this word, endowing oxen and everything. Anyway, James made it to the way to the Amazon, where the real adventure was to begin. Surprisingly, his fragile health held up that the whole way, but once he finally made it, on the first day of the expedition, he promptly contracted smallpox and nearly died in the jungle. Then his back spasm returned, painful to the point of making James unable to walk. Damn. By this time, he was emancipated and starved from smallpox, immobilized by his bad back, and left alone in the middle of South America. The rest of the expedition having gone without him, with no clear way to get home, a journey that would take months and likely kill him anyway. But somehow he eventually made it back to New England, where he was greeted by even a more disappointed father. By this point, the young man wasn't so young anymore. Nearly 30 years old. That's really not that old, but nearly 30 years old, still unemployed, a failure at everything he attempted, with a body that routinely betrayed him and wasn't likely to ever get better. Despite all the advantages and opportunities he had given in life, everything had fallen apart. The only contestants in his life seemed to be suffering and disappointment. James fell into deep depression and began making plans to take his own life. But one night, while reading lectures by the philosopher James Pierce, by philosopher Charles Pierce, James decided to conduct a little experiment. In his diary, he wrote that he would spend 1 year believing that he was 100% responsible for everything that occurred in his life, no matter what. During this period, he would do everything in his power to change his circumstances, no matter the likelihood of failure. If nothing improved in that year, then it would be apparent that he was truly powerless to the circumstances around him, and then he would take his own life. The punchline: Williams James went on to become the father of American psychology. His work has been translated into a bazillion languages, and he is regarded as one of the most influential intellectual philosophers, psychologists of his generation. He would go on to teach at Harvard and would tour much of the United States and Europe giving lectures. He would marry and have 5 children, of one whom Henry would become a famous biographer and win a Pulitzer. James would later refer to his little experiment as a rebirth and would credit it with everything that he later accomplished in his life. There is a simple realization from which all personal improvement and growth emerges. This is the realization that we, individually, are responsible for everything in our lives, no matter the external circumstances. We don't always control what happens to us, but we always control how we interpret what happens to us, as well as how we respond. Whether we consciously recognize it or not, we are always responsible for our experiences. It's impossible not to choose or not to be. Choosing is not consciously interpret events in our lives. It is an interpretation of the events of our lives. Mm. Choosing to not respond to the events in our lives is still a response to the events in our lives. Ooh, that's a good one. Choosing to not respond to the events in our lives is still a response to the events in our lives. Dang. Even if you get run over by a clown car and pissed on by a buttload of school children, it's still your responsibility to interpret the meaning of the event and choose a response. Whether we like it or not, we are always taking an active role in what's occurring to and within us. We are always interpreting the meaning of every moment of every occasion. We are always choosing the values by which we live and the metrics by which we measure everything that happens to us. Often the same event can be good or bad, depending on the metric we choose to use. The point is always, we are always choosing whether we recognize it or not. Always. It comes back to how. In reality, there is no such thing as not giving a single F. It's impossible. We must all give a F about something. To not give a F about anything is to still give a F about something. The real question is, what are we choosing to give a F about? What values are we choosing to base to use our measure of life? And are those good choices? Are those good values and good metrics? The response the responsibility slash fault fallacy. Years ago, when I was much younger and stupider, I wrote a blog post, and at the end of it, I said something like, and as a great philosopher once said, with great power comes great responsibility. It sounded nice and authoritative. I couldn't remember who said it, and my Google search had turned up nothing, but I stuck it there anyways. It fit the post nicely. About 10 minutes later, the first comment came in. I think your great philosopher you're referring to is Uncle Ben from the movie Spider Man. And another great philosopher once said, Doy, with great power comes great responsibility. The last words of Uncle Ben before a thief who Peter Parker let get away murders him on the sidewalk full of people with absolutely no explicable reason. That great philosopher. Still, we've all heard the quote. It gets repeated a lot, usually ironically, and after 7 beers. It's one of the perfect quotes that sounds really intelligent, and yet it's basically just telling you what you already know, even if you've never quite thought about the matter before. With great power comes great responsibility. It is true, but there's a better version of this quote, a version that is actually profound, and all you have to do is switch the nows around. With great responsibility comes great power. The more we choose to accept responsibility in our lives, the more power we will exercise over our lives. Accepting responsibility for our problems is thus the first step to solving them. I once knew a man who was convinced that the reason no woman would date him was because he was short. He was educated, interesting, and good looking, a good catch in principle, but he was absolutely convinced that women found him too short to date. And because he felt he was too short, he didn't often go out and try to meet women. The few times he did, he would hone in the smallest behaviors who from any woman he talked with that could possibly indicate he wasn't attractive enough for her, and then convince himself that she didn't like him, even if she really did. As you can imagine, his dating life sucked. What he didn't realize was he had chosen the value that was hurting him: height. Women, he assumed, are only attracted to height. He was screwed no matter what he did. This choice of value was disempowering. It gave this man a really crappy problem. Not being tall enough in the world meant, in his view, for tall people, there are far better values that he could have adopted in his dating life. I want to date only women who like me for who I am might have been a nice place to start, a metric that assesses the values of honesty and acceptance. But he did not choose those values. He likely wasn't even aware that he was choosing his value or could do so. Even though he didn't realize it, he was responsible for his own problems. Despite the responsibility, he went on complaining, but I don't have a choice, he would tell the bartender, or the bartender. There's nothing I can do. Women are superficial and vain and never will like me. Yes, it's every single woman's fault for not liking a self pitying, shallow guy with SE values, obviously. A lot of people hesitate to take responsibility for their problems because they believe that to be responsible for your own problems is to also be at fault for your problems. Responsibility and fault often appear together in our culture, but they're not the same thing. If I hit you with my car, I am at fault and likely legally responsible to compensate you in some way. Even if hitting you with my car was an accident, I am still responsible. This is the way fault works in our society. If I effed up, if I if if you F up, you're on the hook for making it right. It should be that way. But there are also problems we aren't at fault for, yet we are still responsible for them. I'm going to stop there because my mouth is hurting. But I hope you're enjoying this book. Yes, do I make mistakes? Yes, am I human? Yes, am I still going to educate myself? Of course, because I'm awesome. But I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're liking this book so far, even with my mess ups. And I hope you have a great day. And remember, not to care. Life is so short. Live your best life. But I'll see you next video. I'm at page 98, for example. I'll see you later. Bye.